So there we go. I'm not sure that when we're thinking about pedagogy, it's really any different for us as medievalists than it would be for anybody else. So let me start there. And to suggest what I mean about that. Let's see. So teaching problem. Randy Bass has wrote an article in which he suggested that when we talk about our research and we talk about research problems, that's a good thing. A research problem is to be productive. However, when we talk about teaching problems, a teaching problem is a bad thing. It's a sign that you're a bad teacher. And what he's arguing in this article is instead that we should think about teaching problems as good things, as ways in which we can apply the same intellectual processes that we use when we're doing our disciplinary work to the classroom. To see them as opportunities. Now, we've just been presented with a colossal opportunity that has really sort of unsettled all of the things that we do. And part of it is that we tend to teach from what Jerome Brunner calls folk pedagogies. That is, we learn to teach focusly, we learn by watching and by being students, and we haven't really often thought very much about why we're doing the things that we're doing. And the thing about folk pedagogies is they persist because they more or less work. But we've now sort of arrived at this environment where they don't work so well. Our folk pedagogies have tended to focus on content rather than on what students do. And that's a crucial difference. So we all know this slide. This is a famous slide of a medieval lecture, and there are lots of things that we could say about it. But the little trysts that are going on, the student who's sleeping. But what I would point out is that not all the students have books. Our pedagogies have developed in an environment of information scarcity, and that doesn't exist anymore. Now, having said that, many medievalists are really challenging some of these traditions, and I'll just give a little bit of shout out to Mary Lynn Rampolo, who's written a guide to writing in history. It's very popular, and Peter Burkhalter, who's been active with the teaching professor. But I would say that, again, our moment is pushing us to rethink what it is that we think that we're doing. Now, the problem, of course, is that it came on us very suddenly. And very radically. And if your institution is like mine, you're being peppered by, do this, try this. We're having this seminar. We're doing webinars. Everybody's AHA is doing webinars. Information is flying at us fast and furiously, like the asteroid field in Star Wars. And I will just say that I know that asteroid fields are mostly empty. So this is actually an inaccurate representation, but nonetheless, it's what there is. So here we are trying to negotiate it. So what I'm suggesting is that we can take a step back and begin to think through all of the many excellent suggestions that are being made to see which ones we want to use, but that we're probably going to need a little bit of theory to do that. And particularly pedagogical theory. Now, in our research, we use theory all the time. We use race theory, gender theory, intersectionality, you name it. But teaching is also intellectual work. And so a little theory can help us begin to sort through some of these problems, and particularly theories of pedagogy. So here I'm ventriloquizing David Perkins, who describes theories of pedagogy as ways of organizing teaching for best results, considering activities that foster learning, figuring how to select and organize material for best learning, and considering pace and sequence. So theory can help you make some choices and sort through all those asteroids. So 2 pedagogical ideas today. The first one is sort of fundamental to teaching and learning, and that is backward design. And I'll come to the other one next. So the big backward design question is, what do I want my students to know and be able to do at the end of my course? So knowing is something we've been good at. Knowing is, we give exams to do that. Our answer to this question cannot be a bunch of stuff about the Middle Ages. No one would say that. If I asked you what you want your students to do, your answer would be far more sophisticated than that. But students can come away thinking that that's what they're being asked to do. So I want to shift the emphasis from knowing to what they're able to do. Because, so for instance, if we were teaching languages, we wouldn't say what we want students to know is a whole bunch of vocabulary. We would want them to speak, and they would know some of the vocabulary. So that's the big backward design question. The follow-up question is, what work would they do that would show me that they, one, can do it, or two, know what we want them to know some of it, can do some of it, know a little, can do a little, are clueless, okay? And the thing is that exams traditionally have been about knowing. So we need to be thinking about other kinds of terminal assignments for students to be doing that show us what they can do, show us clearly. Now, essays, obviously, take-home essays give us a lot of information, but they're also a very complex form, and everything has to go right in an essay for us to really see what a student knows and is able to do. There are a number of suggestions that you can find if you go to NILOA, the National Institute on Learning Outcomes Assessment. Let's not be so allergic to this word assessment. It's just evaluating what our students know. The other part of it is obviously letting our students know why. So I'm going to give you, so the next question is, okay, what course assignments will help students develop the competencies you want to have, find the knowledge we want them to demonstrate for the final assignment, which will show us how well they can do it. And then last in backward design comes content. What content do we need? So we tend to be very content focused, but backward design suggests that we should flip that around and we should do it a little bit differently, maybe a little bit backward. So, no, that's too soon. So I'm going to give you an example, and I'm not going to give you slides that go with it, of how I worked through this backward design problem, because you want to know what medievalists are doing. I wanted students to be able to construct a historical context. Weaving context is an essential historical skill. It's also one of the most difficult. It's an unnatural act. And I had tried doing it with essays, and they were a problem. You know, essays are a problem for a number of reasons. These were take-homes. One, they're ritual. So you'll have students ask you, do I need to write 5 paragraphs? They're highly ritualized. There's a great Bob Bain article about ritual practices and the way they affect what goes on in the classroom. Students also tend to throw spaghetti at the wall, throw in as many facts as possible, hoping that some of them are the right facts. And when we read them, say, oh yeah, here's something they should have said, and we don't pay so much attention to all the things they said that they perhaps shouldn't have said. So essays didn't work. So what I decided was to have students do posters in teams. They haven't done posters, so they have no ritual associations with them. Posters are very succinct, so they had to be highly selective. And posters are really clear. You can see what they know and what they don't know through that selection process. So I've given, in the accompanying materials, I've given you an example of a prompt of this kind, and then and a student product, a group of students product to that prompt. And you can have a look at it if you're interested. So obviously they needed to, in the process, know what they needed to look at to create the context. So that dictated the assignments that I gave them. And then the content was selected to clarify those relationships. So but backward design can help you do all this selective process, because, you know, it's like we're making a meal and here are all the possibilities. You know, we can go to the store and we can just kind of throw things into the basket and maybe they'll work. Or we can say, okay, this is what we're having for dinner. These are the methods we're going to use. Here's our selection. Now let's go to the store and let's pull out all of the individual items we need. So that's backward design. The other approach is less totalizing. So backward design is a lot of work. We don't teach only one course a semester. We're exhausted. We're depressed by our current situation. We may not have time to go through all of the things that we might want to do. So here are some less totalizing approaches that focus on what people sometimes call stuck places. That is, places where when you have students who are doing the work, they're still not getting it. So bottlenecks, the term bottlenecks comes out of decoding the disciplines. And the big question is, where do my students routinely get stuck, even when they're doing the work? And we tend to think it's about content, and particularly as medievalists, we think our content is hard, but it's more probably epistemic. Students don't necessarily know the moves that we want them to make. Let me give you an example from my own work. I have students look at Einhardt's The Life of Charlemagne. As we all know, it's not dated. It's been dated everywhere from 817 to 836. Scholars don't agree on those dates. And so what I ask my students to do is to choose a date and then to interpret the text based on that date. And they will all choose a date. And then initially they will just say a bunch of stuff that is not related to the date at all. They don't understand why the date matters. The date is just a factoid that they're supposed to know, and they don't see it as an interpretive tool. So what's really behind this is actually an epistemic move. It's not a question of that. The next step is, what do I do so that I don't get stuck when they get stuck? And that's thinking about our own process, although often we don't know how we learn things. So it may be instead saying what would be a series of moves that would help students understand what's going on. And then, as in backward design, what lessons will teach them, and what practice do they need so that they're not getting stuck in this process. Now, sometimes people will say, well, you know, you're just, if you spend your whole semester, you know, sort of visiting this problem, in addition to all of the other things that you do, what about all those other things they don't know? And we can all think about tons of things that our students don't understand how to do, and we can't teach them all. That's just a function of our limited time in the classroom, 45 hours in a semester in a standard class. So our argument has been that because all of these epistemic moves are connected to each other, if you focus on one through the semester, you do it systematically, you evaluate where they really are getting it, they will make progress in some of the others because they are connected. So the metaphor we like is this iceberg. And we actually have, my project has some data to show that. Students made progress even in areas that we weren't actually teaching or focusing on teaching in the classroom. So, so that's for decoding the disciplines. The threshold concept questions are sort of similar, but threshold concepts start from what we think is important, what we think are the big concepts in a given course. So an example of that would be something like cultural work. When students are looking at miracles, they often either think their job is to either believe them or not believe them. And belief has nothing to do with it. What we tend to say to them is, look, you know, think about what work this miracle is doing. You know, transubstantiation miracles are teaching about transubstantiation. Punishment of people who mock the saints are teaching people about how they should comport themselves in relation to the saints. And I should say about these concepts generally that they're not neutral because they arise from these very ways of knowing, which are ideological and not neutral. But since we're going to expect our students to understand these concepts we should make them really clear, but we should also make their ideological underpinnings really clear. So in the discipline of history, for instance, history favors those cultures that produce written records of a historical type. And it disadvantages cultures like the culture of India, which produced a tremendous amount of literature, but they're not very interested in history or the kinds of documents that help historians. Those ideological impulses, I think we want to make really, really clear. And then after we decide what these concepts are, we can teach them in the same way that we would teach a bottleneck. And again, the idea is to do it systematically through the semester regularly, and also to make sure that the final assignment calls on those concepts. Because there have been a number of studies of threshold concepts where in the end, how a student did in the course had nothing to do with whether they mastered the threshold concepts or not. That's a teaching fail, I would say. So this is really a plea to use theory to recognize that learning is doing. You learn to drive a car by driving a car. You learn to dance by getting up and dancing. A student who is sitting in a classroom and listening intensely is doing. Listening intensely is doing, but a student who's on the phone is obviously not. And so the question is, what activities, what kind of doing is happening in your classroom? And that's really crucial in the virtual world, where there's so much less sitting, or students can log in and tune out as they're already saying, I logged in and I tuned out. What are we having them do? How does that align with what we want them to learn? So I'm really making a plea to shift from thinking so much about teaching to thinking about learning and how you can promote it, to think about being intentional in what you do, and going meta. We think that our students learn better when they do metacognitive reflection, when they think about how they're learning. And the bottom line is we do too. We're flying around, we're birds. This is a plea to learn some ornithography. Okay, I think I am done. Thank you for listening.